This podcast is brought to you by the School of Advanced Study, University of London.
Feuerbach and Marx. I don't really aim to even get to Marx, but we'll see how we do with that. And from Feuerbach we have this text on Principles of Philosophy of the Future, quite a famous text by Feuerbach. Also already quite popular shortly after it was published in the year after, 2 years after the publication of The Essence of Christianity, which was the book that made Feuerbach famous, in which he articulates the idea that religion is a projection of human affairs, of human desires, really, wishes into a transcendent sphere. And then, of course, that movement idea is not really that new. People had said it before in various ways, also already in antiquity. But of course, it was still quite a radical thing to say at that point in time, especially in the context of the aftermath of Hegel's philosophy. And that book meant that Feuerbach could have no hope of an academic career. And so basically he moved outside of the institution of the philosophical system all his life, ending up even living in a small village in Franken, so in the southeast of Germany, where he, near Erlangen, I think, where he spent the last decade of his life almost in complete isolation. But he had been very famous with The Essence of Christianity, on which he also lectured publicly, not at universities, but he gave a famous series of lectures in Heidelberg, to which many people came, students and also other interested people. He had a big influence on Marx, on the emergence of Marxism with his projection idea of religion. And all in all, he stands in this aftermath of Hegel. Certainly not, of course, a right-wing Hegelian, but also not quite a member of the school of left Hegelians, which has with Max Stirner and Grunewald, people like that, because left Hegelianism was a very, although it emphasized progressive elements of Hegel's philosophy, it was still very much a bourgeois kind of thinking. Also, if we think of the book Der Einzelne and Eigentum, how's that translated, the individual and his property, the
ego himself.
That book is in a way a kind of almost a fanciful display of a pure solipsistic position that arises out of this school of Materialism. And so Feuerbach is a little bit at a distance of that as well, but certainly belongs more in that camp, if you want to put it like that, than in the other one. And well, I don't know what you thought of it, but of this particular text, reading it for the first time, or maybe rereading it, I thought it was very, very interesting. Quite a spectacular text, really. That in a way also, I think, especially in terms of our interest, what is the development of the concept of matter and materialism, plays a very important role. And what I think I'm concerned with in the seminar now is to investigate the idea, or to maybe defend the claim, that Feuerbach is more than a stepping stone from Hegel to Marx. And that is, I think, one of the, because historically that's very much how Feuerbach is usually dealt with, and even in periods where there is kind of an interest in Feuerbach's own texts. For example, in the UK we've had last year or so, I think, a new publication of Feuerbach's, some of Feuerbach's essays, I think you have it over there.
Yeah.
What was it called again? The fiery.
Yeah, the fiery book. Brook, sorry.
The fiery brook. Yeah, Feuerbach is fiery creek or fiery brook. That's a pun.
His name.
Yeah, that's a pun that was already made in his days by his large fan base, and that Marx also.
I think Marx is that as well.
Yeah, but I don't think Marx came up with it. I think it was around before he wrote it down. So yeah, that indicates something of the spirit of this philosophy. We have here to do with a kind of fiery thought, with a kind of something that finds its way, and that is something new, something that cannot be reduced to what came before. And that's also how Feuerbach sees his own position, especially in this text, Principles for Philosophy of the Future. He is concerned to outline in good modern fashion, as it were, a completely new understanding of philosophy. And he says, just as speculative philosophy, in point in case Hegel's philosophy is the truth of theology, so the new philosophy is the truth of Hegelian philosophy, or as he calls it, speculative philosophy. And so he sees his materialism, he describes his new philosophy as materialism. He sees this as a result of working through the problems with the Hegelian philosophy, just as Hegel's philosophy was a result of working through the problems with theology, both Catholic theology and Protestant theology, and its distinction between those two things. The beginning of the text, we can talk about that a bit later on. But I want to highlight, before we look at the text, I want to just highlight a number of these fundamental concepts. So I already mentioned the well-known idea that religion is a projection of human wishes and desires, and in a way, Feuerbach starts to think, in the essence of Christianity, from the concept of alienation. And he takes this concept, of course, from Hegel, who uses it quite extensively, but he transforms this and applies this to the question of religion. Hegel had already said the treasures of the human treasures have been hurled into heaven by religion, a certain kind of religion. Feuerbach takes that claim and makes it more radical and applies it to the whole of Christianity. So he starts from the idea that there is an alienation, there are processes of alienation in human life and society which lead to, for example, religion, and also maybe some other things. And he particularly discusses this term, alienation and Fremdung, and also Verdinglichung, so reification, making something that's not a thing into a thing. And thing here, Ding, relates to that which can be the object of a negotiation or a discussion, something that is up for discussion or up for sale. And so he takes that term in a literal sense. In religion, something is externalized or objectified, both, in an inappropriate way, something that hasn't got, that cannot be, in that sense, sold or externalized. That seems to be the idea. And that leads him to a position, which we will discuss today, in which philosophy becomes really anthropology, in which the human being, der Mensch, is the starting point and the beginning point of all historical materialist thought, or all philosophy in a way, and in a kind of irreducible sense, in the sense that for Feuerbach's materialism, it is not so much the case that we can, of course, scientifically we might do that we can start with the human being in his social existence or individual existence, and then travel down to the level at which a human being is a swirl of atoms, as it were. But that's not how Feuerbach takes materialism. He takes materialism as a kind of thinking that starts and ends with the human being in the human life sphere. Our self-experience and self-perception is a starting point for what he calls materialism or anthropology. And that leads to an interesting point, and that is, I think, I'm going very sketchy now, but that's maybe the main point where you can say Hegel, Feuerbach is more than a stepping stone from Hegel to Marx. And that's in the idea that in all these alienated or objectified expressions of human desires, there is something that is inalienable and that counts. And of course that idea is present in Marx, but maybe not quite to the extent to which it is present in Feuerbach. So for example, Feuerbach writes, this is not in our text, but in the Essence of Christianity, he says the belief in a Jenseits, in a beyond or an afterlife, is the belief of the freedom of subjectivity from the limits of or the chains of nature, and consequentially it is the belief of the human being in himself. So the idea that the belief in an afterlife, belief in a beyond, is the belief that subjectivity can be free from the chains of nature, from the limits of nature. Yes. From the limits of nature, and that is the belief of the human being in him or herself. And that implies in a way that although we get here a very, very fierce, relentless critique of religion as alienated thinking, that which is alienated has got a kind of relevance or keeps a certain relevance for Feuerbach. And so he will also say in our text today, at one point he says, therefore the new philosophy is the real religion, as it were, things like that. Whereas in Marx's subsequent historical materialism, at least maybe certain strands of it, it is much more the case that there is a tone of suggesting that some of these things that are wished for, let's say in religion, are actually themselves illusions. And that is, I think, the point where Marx and Feuerbach start to diverge a little bit. Marx then critiques Feuerbach for saying, well, for remaining essentially in a bourgeois religious standpoint or sensibility. Whereas from the point of Feuerbach, you might say he tries to rescue, to inherit some of the core aspects of religion by saying that although the form is alienated, that with which these contents are concerned is not. The difference is not radical, I think, but it is noticeable, and it's important to bear it in mind, because otherwise I think it's difficult to make sense even of Marx's critique of Feuerbach. So, for example, in that, put this up on the screen here now, for example, in the first thesis on Feuerbach, which we didn't read, but of course it's in the background here all the time, Marx starts by saying, the chief defect of all hitherto existing materialism, that Feuerbach included, is that the thing, reality, sensuousness, is conceived only in the form of the object or of contemplation, but not as sensuous human activity, practice, not subjectively. Hence, in contradistinction to materialism, the active side was developed abstractly by idealism, which of course does not know real sensuous activity as such. Feuerbach wants sensuous objects, really distinct from the thought objects, but it does not conceive human activity itself as objective activity. Hence, in the Essence of Christianity, he regards the theoretical attitude as the only genuinely human attitude, while practice is conceived and fixed only in its dirty Judaical manifestation. Hence, he does not grasp the significance of revolutionary or practical activity. And though it is true that Feuerbach did not play an active part in the widespread European revolutions of 1848, which of course was right at the height of his fame and his activity, he had no connection with the emerging notion of proletariat, really. But it's not true, I think, certainly not if you read the philosophy, the principles of philosophy of the future, simply not true to suggest that for him matter is conceived only in the form of the object of contemplation, because he very specifically talks in the end of the text about the practical and the practical quality of the new philosophy, he calls it, and he also says the experience that we have of ourselves, so inner experience and the experience of ourselves as embodied, is precisely the material. And so he speaks about embodiment, he says, only in community are we ourselves as human beings in the I-you relationship.
But that quote from Marx seems to suggest that Marx doesn't have a realm of objective idealism in his philosophy. I'm not sure whether that would stand up with the rest of Marx's work, but Hegel would say to that, you've reduced reality to the practical human, but there's a lot more in reality than the practical human.
Yeah.
So both Marx and Feuerbach seem to be sorely at fault here.
Yeah, well, okay, and that's assuming that Hegel is right.
If you can think of something, I agree with Hegel, but if you can think of something, then it must be part of reality. If you can think of a realm of objective idealism, it must be part of reality. Otherwise, where did it come from?
Yeah, you can think of things that don't exist or not. You can think of unicorns.
Well, but if Marx was right about that, we would have solved all the problems by now. If reality was just reducible to human practical activity, we would, through a process of sort of self-reflection or something, we would have solved all the problems by now.
That's what he's accusing Feuerbach of.
Yeah.
He's accusing Feuerbach and with it Hegel implicitly of the belief that what's required is just to change our ideas.
But Marx himself is saying that reality is reducible to what he says there, practical, critical activity.
No, so the first sentence, the thing reality sentence is conceived only in the form of the object of contemplation. So it's the same as the earlier is the one-sided emphasis on the theoretical.
Yeah,
it's not denying the theoretical because he's accepting what Feuerbach is saying, just saying Feuerbach's still got his head stuck in the clouds. And that's the point there that Johan is right to say is a bit of a caricature.
Yeah, but in the final sentence of that paragraph, Marx is saying Feuerbach has not grasped the significance of revolutionary, of practical, critical activity. But if that was the problem, if that was the main problem, we would have solved everything by now. It's obviously not the main problem. The main problem is that both Feuerbach and Marx don't seem to have grasped a massive part of Hegel's philosophy, which is the realm of objective idealism.
Okay, let's start to look at that in the background, because that's precisely how the philosophy of the future starts. The principle of philosophy of the future. So I think we can look at that by going back to the beginning of this text. And roughly this text, well, I don't think in the German version, but it is roughly, we can roughly divide it. It's not divided by 5, but we can divide it like this. Paragraphs 1 to 18 deal with history, paragraphs 19 to 30 deal with critique of Hegel, and 31 to 65 with the principles of the new philosophy, which is where most of the ideas that Feuerbach himself has are being explained. So in this history of modern philosophy, you get basically what I started out by saying, the Feuerbach sees his new philosophy as the truth of Hegel, and he sees Hegel as the truth of theology. And basically what he is doing in this first bit in History of Modern Philosophy starts with that idea. The task of the modern era was the realization and humanization of God, the transformation and dissolution of theology into anthropology. That spans the whole text. That's what happens here. We start with theology and we end up with anthropology. And he sees Hegel's philosophy very much as a halfway house in that process, in which the idea of an absolute reason comes to take the place of God. And that happens under a basic shift from pre-modern thinking to modern thinking, which is a shift from an object-oriented kind of thinking to thinking that bases itself on subjectivity as reliable and certain. That's the basic Cartesian move. We know that we think, we don't know what is out there in the world really. So from to start with what we're certain of, we start with subjectivity. And he sees Hegel's philosophy as a way of taking the idea of a God object into basically a subjective kind of philosophy, in which the idea of an absolute essence that is at the same time existence, the old idea of God, becomes the self-efficacy and self-realization of the subject, of subjective spirit, and in an absolute spirit. And he sees this as something that is reflected in the beginning, also in the shift from Catholicism to Protestantism. He's a little bit, I don't know what you think of it, but some of it reads schematically now, I think. You can see Feuerbach operating these large categories very much in the way in which Hegel does that too. And I think that's a bit, the spirit of the times, that's what they like to do. I think we wouldn't do that today anymore in that way. But nevertheless, he seems to be thinking that the Catholic outlook has to do with realism, with the world, or with God as an object or as a truth that we have to understand and relate ourselves to, whereas in Protestantism the only thing about God that is important is what God is for man, for us. And that means that Protestantism is the move from theory to practice already. So this is a first remark to say that why Marx's remark in his thesis 1 is a bit of a caricature. However, Protestantism negated God in himself, or God as God, for only God in himself is strictly speaking God. Only in practice, theoretically, it left him intact. He exists, however, not for man, that is, a religious man. He is a transcendent being, or a being that will one day become an object for man up there in heaven. But that which is otherworldly to religion is this worldly to philosophy. What does not constitute an object for the former does so precisely for the latter. The rational theoretical assimilation and dissolution of the God that is otherworldly to religion and hence not given to it as an object is the speculative philosophy. And so he can then say the essence of speculative philosophy is nothing other than the rationalized, realized, actualized essence of God. The speculative philosophy is the true, consistent, rational theology.
But throughout, he would accept the categories that were in theology and new philosophy. He reverses them, he brings them down, but he accepts them, like essence and so on.
Yeah.
Well, that's where Marx criticism comes.
Yes.
For Marx, essence is not the essence of a human being. It's social relationship. It's not an essence that's given. But Feuerbach seems to accept all the categories of idealism and modern philosophy, what you call modern philosophy. But he only brings them down to the individual existing in this world. But he accepts and works with these categories.
Yeah, I think that's, he does do that, yeah. But that's right, he does do that, but then towards the end he starts to say things like the new philosophy is radically different from the old one. You know?
I think Marx, that's, if I understood it right, that's where Marx thinks he's short of, because for this sensuous things, it's not really activity in life, in the production, in political activity and so on. It's just taken the subject, object of old philosophy and taken essences and so on.
Yeah, of course, he uses the term essence all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, for example, in the thesis, what is it now? So 64, right at the end. Old philosophy has a double truth. The truth for itself, which is not concerned with human beings, which is philosophy, and the truth for the human being, which is religion. The new philosophy, on the contrary, as a philosophy of human beings, is essentially also a philosophy for human beings. She has, notwithstanding the dignity and independence of theory, but much more in the most intimate harmony with theory, essentially a practical and even in the highest sense practical tendency. She occupies the place of religion. She has the essence of religion in itself. She is, in truth, itself religion. So there you see, indeed, he accepts these categories, but it's almost as if he's trying to say something with them that has not been said before.
Yeah.
And you find that on basically every point. But he does also say there that dialectic is not a monologue of a spirit with itself, but is a dialogue between real people, and that only in community can we find freedom. So it is right that he does that.
I'm not sure it's quite the case that there's a big difference between Marx and Feuerbach certain periods, because in this respect, because the term essence is German Wesen, being. Of course, Feuerbach is emphasizing it's talking not about God, who is the supreme being, the highest being, and so forth. So that's the primary prompt for this kind of terminological focus. But then, of course, we find in Marx, Gattungswesen.
Yeah,
So it's the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right, yeah. And although Marx doesn't say that he knows what that is, or he doesn't have a specific, there's a lot in it that will only come out with history, but he does use that term. That's absolutely right. Yeah. So yes, that's right. In a way, that's also going on in Marx. Yeah.
I mean, the idea of species being, which I think is a translation of Gattungswesen, that originates in Hegel, not in Marx. So the issue is, has Marx correctly understood what Hegel meant by species being?
No, the question is whether Hegel was right. It's not a question about Hegel exists all the time. And clearly, Feuerbach and Marx will think that Hegel got it wrong.
Yeah. Well, what does Hegel mean by it, according to you?
Well, I think it's a massive question, but I think if Marx had got it right, we wouldn't be where we are now in history.
Well, surely, I don't understand that this point about history. Surely, it's not all Marx's fault. I mean, if it's somebody's fault where we are in history, it's equally Hegel's fault and Feuerbach's fault and everyone's fault. So I'm not sure about that line of argument.
No, if you pick a concept, if you elaborate a concept correctly, and then somebody comes along and translates that incorrectly, it's their responsibility. but they've translated it incorrectly.
Yeah, but you can't assume that Hegel is right.
No, I'm not assuming that Hegel is right, but if Marx was right, I don't understand how we could be where we are now in history.
But that's the point. Then if Hegel was right, then how could we be where we are in history as well? The arguments rebound on anybody you choose to put in.
No, I don't understand that. If Hegel got it a lot more wrong,
why is Marx culpable for the place we find ourselves in now, and not somebody else?
well, let's suppose for a moment that Marx did get species being wrong in some respect. Species being is a massively important concept. If he got it wrong, then surely as a theoretician he bears the responsibility for getting it wrong.
Well, I don't know about that. I mean, that seems a little bit like philosophy is not a blame game.
Well, if somebody got it right before him and he got it wrong, then
all these people trying to work out what these ideas mean, and they're throwing out all their various takes on what these ideas might mean, and we can decide, surely.
Yeah. So unless can you indicate what species being then means for you?
Well, it doesn't mean this massive concentration that Marx and Feuerbach have got on human practical activity, because whatever they may say, whatever Feuerbach may say about I'm not ignoring the theoretical, and what Marx may say about I'm not ignoring the theoretical, I think they are ignoring something about the theoretical.
What is it they're ignoring?
Well, I think they're underplaying the labour of the concept. I think they're assuming that the concept reveals itself in some sort of uncomplicated, unproblematic way in the way in which we identify unfolding human practical activity. But I think that that is to overrate the importance of the sensuous and to underestimate the importance of developing concepts about the way history is unfolding.
Okay, so is that the gist here in Philosophy of the Future? Is it to say, what is the main thesis of this text here?
Well,
there is a kind of movement that goes from abstract theory, as Feuerbach sees it, to another mode of thinking, the new philosophy, which he says is based on the empirical, in a quite a reformulated sense. He's not talking about scientific method in a way, although that's part of it. So what is involved in this move from what he calls the old philosophy to the new philosophy? Is that simply the abdication of theory, or the abdication of the work of the labor of the concept, as it were, or of the idea? Is that how you see it?
Well, I think that he's more or less ignoring the labour of the concept. That he wants things to be a lot simpler than they actually are. Because he wants, you've already said that he reduces philosophy to anthropology. I think that's illegitimate. I don't think philosophy can be reduced to anthropology.
Yes, but I think I've also said that in his view of what anthropology is, it is very different from how we understand it today, that's in a more or less empirical study of anthropology. Just as in the critique of religion, something is maintained of the wish that spawns religion.
Yeah, well, I think
what he seems to be, sorry for interrupting, what he seems to be denying, And in that sense, it is directed against Hegel, certainly in the beginning, is a kind of philosophy that thinks its way out of things, and that basis that can be just autistically inward looking. That is what he, and insofar as thought claims to be able to think reality, think being, without going through the actual concrete reality of existing things and their experience and our experiences with them, it remains abstract. And it is a form of theology, which means for Feuerbach it is a form of wishful thinking. So he formulates a very, very stringent criterion by which to critique attempts at understanding the world. But it seems to me that it's much more about this kind of attitude that's his concern, than that he would deny anything, specifically, that he would say conceptual thinking is not important.
His point would be conceptual thinking is something human beings engage in. It doesn't have some transcendent sort of status as he thinks he recognises it does in Hegel. That would be his criticism of Hegel. He doesn't actually say reducing philosophy to anthropology, but rather dissolving theology into anthropology. So philosophy is anthropology, presumably because, given the dissolution of theology, there's nothing other that philosophy could be the ology of, other than the human.
Yeah.
Yeah, but then why is the majority of the Bodleian Library devoted to theology?
It's also medieval stuff.
Well, why is it?
The largest section in the Bodleian Library in Oxford is devoted to theology.
Yeah.
So,
Of course it's all that.
Theology's been around for a long time.
yeah.
If you want a good job in the city, but you're not that smart, then it's best to go to study theology in Oxbridge.
Yeah.
Well, what does Feuerbach do all this time? He writes about theology. He clearly thinks it's worth engaging in.
But
why theology? It's a really historical materialist question, isn't it? Why is the theology section the biggest in the Bodleian Library? I mean, you could give all sorts of Marxist answers to that question.
But the main reason is because human beings have spent more time thinking about that than they have about anything else.
Yeah, that's not.
And there's a reason for that.
Yeah.
Well, maybe there's more opportunity for kind of waffling on because there's no clear answers.
Yeah.
That's another reason.
And there are all sorts of interests that covered by religion. And Russell already said always, when people said language contains the wisdom of the ages, he always used to say, you could also say it contains the foolishness of the ages. So the fact that people have been doing something for a very long time doesn't, although there is some pragmatic relevance to say, well, maybe there's a point to it, but there's no guarantee.
So you would reduce theology to just a bourgeois form of thought?
Well, no, I wouldn't go so far as to say that. No.
So if there is something in theology, then the way that Feuerbach seems to deal with it seems to be, to me, just dismissive.
It's not dismissive.
No.
He's clearly saying there's lots in it, and we've got to get our hands on it.
Yeah, exactly.
It's an entirely appreciative critique, as critique is and ought to be. So I think you're misreading Feuerbach disastrously, if that's my taking.
It's quite the opposite. He says there's something in there that is so important that we have to get a correct understanding of it.
As opposed to, say, kind of 18th century French materialist sort of atheism, which
that's his beef with mechanical materialism.
But how can you get a correct grasp of theology if you say, right, I'm going to put theology over here, philosophy is going to come over here with anthropology, and I'm going to talk about this? What's happened to that?
Well, we should have a look at the text and see what happens here. listen to the paragraph. So he starts in this first section of paragraph 18 by making a distinction in line with the distinction that he drew between Catholicism and Protestantism. He now starts to sort of draw a distinction between theism and speculative philosophy. And he says they're both abstract, but theism has to do with this idea of God as an objective other, and speculative philosophy reclaims all the contents of theism, but in the framework of the process of coming to itself of spirit. But most of the text, if I understand correctly, is concerned with indicating how all the attributes of the divine can actually be read both in a theistic way, but also in a way in which they feature in basically Hegel's idea of an absolute spirit. Yeah? Paragraph 6, taken as an intelligible geistig, it says in German, Gott als Gott. Yeah, in German the text is better because it begins with that phrase Gott qua Gott, Gott als Gott, and that's theism. Taken as an intelligible or an abstract being that is regarded neither as human nor as sensuous, but rather as one that is an object for and accessible only to reason or intelligence, God qua God is nothing but the essence of reason itself. But basing themselves rather on imagination, ordinary theology and theism regard him as an independent being existing separately from reason. Under these circumstances, it is an inner, a sacred necessity that the essence of reason, as distinguished from reason itself, be at least identified with it, and the divine being thus apprehended, realized as the essence of reason. It is on this necessity that the great historical significance of speculative philosophy rests. The proof of the proposition that the divine essence is the essence of reason or intelligence lies in the fact that the determinations or qualities of God, insofar as they are rational or intelligible and not determinations of sensuous or imagination, are in fact qualities of reason. So that paragraph, I mean, it hides a lot, there's a lot in there, but there is the idea that certain aspects of the concept of God are actually objectifications, alienations of the principles of reason. And these are things such as infinity being so cause, so having ground within itself, being necessary, being a unity of essence and existence.
Omniscience comes up. Omniscience.
Omniscience, yeah, exactly, yeah. So all these qualities, and he says, therefore speculative philosophy has great historical significance, because it is, as it were, it is the first anchor onto that transcendent thing that pulls it back, starts putting it back to earth, as it were. Yeah? Note that he speaks here about our understanding of the divine insofar as it has got nothing to do with imagination or with the determination of sensuousness. Now, the determination of sensuousness is, I think, not part of, even that you can't really say. But if we look at the, so if we were to take a critical attitude towards this paragraph, and we were to say, well, what is in the history of religion the experience of the divine? Is that an intellectual experience? Then I think we would have to say no. Certainly not only. It is an experience of, as in theology it is often said, it's an experience of the numinous, the sacred, that which is, as Benjamin says so beautifully about aura, it is that which, no matter how close you get to something, there remains a distance. And that is the distance of the object. So to what extent to what extent is what Feuerbach says here, is that actually true of the God of theism, or the God of religion? It may be true of the God of theism as an intellectual position, but if we look at the experience if we look at, as William James would say, religious experience, then it is much more than, of course, intellectual. And imagination and sensuousness play a very big role in it. Think of the sensuous element of mystical experience. Think of the imaginative aspect of the approach to the divine through parables and the whole symbolic reading of the Bible, or any revealed text. So there seems to be something there that we should not forget about. We're talking here.
But it isn't easy to be able to rely upon a sort of standard Hegelian narrative of religion becoming more intellectual, which is part of his point about the Catholicism, Protestantism.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's a hollowing out.
Well, it's purification. It's rendering the divine more tractable, accessible to thought. So it can become human, rather than being represented as embodied as genuinely other.
Yeah, that's right. But it doesn't perhaps mean necessarily that these elements of the divine, the numinous quality, basically, the mysterium, the tremendous mystery of religious experience, that disappears completely in the process of rescuing the religious. It may be reformulated along the lines of as coordinations of human sensuousness and human imagination. For example, in Benjamin's description of aura as an experience of a distance that remains in an object, no matter how close you get to it.
There's this idea about God being similar and dissimilar. God being in himself, you find that in theology, in Islamic theology, and Judaism as well. In Judaism, say you can't say anything about God. It's just him and himself.
Yeah.
And there is the idea that, well, from our side, there is also a God that is knowledgeable, and so we attribute to him things which we know.
Yeah, exactly. But that idea, so you might say Feuerbach, if you take Feuerbach's view of religion seriously, then we might want to say, just for the sake of argument here, we might want to say there is no God. That's a projection. But there is, in sensuous experience, there is a moment which has to do with not knowing what the object of experience in itself is. So this experience of familiarity and strangeness is somehow a coordination of experience, is a part of human experience. It's only when you put it in a reified context, saying that has only got to do with God, that is what he's trying to get at. So, as it's like communicating vessels, as more water, as you take more out of religion, the concept of the understanding of human sensuous experience and existence, it becomes richer and richer. Maybe, yeah. Because note, if you remember, later on in the text, he will start to speak precisely about, of course, what sensuousness is, and he says it's more than what we think it is, but also about imagination. So he explicitly has a whole sort of an outline almost of an epistemology that does not just look at knowledge, but that actually deals with imagination, that comes up as the basis of our relation to others and to the world. But in line with the intellectualization of religion, in theism, you get this position which then actually starts to identify, and comes up first of all historically with the qualities that pertain to God as God, and later on it will turn out that actually what happens here is itself also alienated, coming to itself, self-understanding of the properties of reason itself. That which is object in theism is subject in speculative philosophy. That which is only the conceived and imagined essence of reason in theism is the thinking essence of reason itself in speculative philosophy. And that's the big move that is made from, if we want to personify it, you might say from Aquinas to Hegel or something like that. The inner necessity, third paragraph of 7, the inner necessity by which God is turned from an object of man into his subject, into his thinking ego, can be demonstrated more specifically in the following way. This is an important paragraph. God is an object of man and of man alone, and not of the animal. However, what a being is can be known only through its object. The object to which a being is necessarily related is nothing but its own manifest being. So it makes a distinction between the being and the object to which that being is related. Thus, the object of the herbivorous animals is the plant. It is, however, precisely through their object that these are distinguished from other animals, the carnivorous ones. Similarly, the object of the eye is light and not sound or smell. It is through this object that the eye reveals its essence to us. It therefore comes down to the same thing whether someone cannot see or has no eyes. Yeah. That is also why we name things in life with respect to their objects. The eye is the light organ. He who cultivates land is a land cultivator. Someone else, the object whose activity is hunting, is a hunter. He who catches fish is a fisher, and so forth. I could see, you could hear Marx in the background. Yeah? Now, if God is an object of man, and he is indeed that necessarily and essentially, the essence of this object expresses nothing but man's own essence. Imagine to yourself that a thinking being on some planet, or even on a comet, happened to glance at a few paragraphs of Christian dogmatics dealing with the being of God. What would this being infer from these paragraphs? Perhaps the existence of a God in the sense of Christian dogmatics? No. Its inference would be that the earth too is inhabited by thinking beings. In their definitions of God, we discover only the definitions of their own essence. Yeah. Well, that's quite an argument, yeah? Okay, that is how Feuerbach makes the transition from God as object and properties of which are investigated in theism to speculative philosophy, realizing that God talk is just us thinking about what is proper to ourselves as humans, so not insofar as we are also share something with the animals, but insofar as we are human. And again, there's a very traditional idea underlying that of always tripartite soul, etc., etc.
I can't remember last week of the songwriting thing that you got in the first, I think it was the first one about when people go to buy some sausages or something like that, you have the line, you have the dog that can't understand what is taking place between the two users in the transaction of money, so they sort of talk about God in the same way.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so talks about money as a sort of as a socially conditioned concept. Sort of,
yeah, that's right. Yeah, of course. And for him, money is very closely related to spirit itself. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
But that's the premise he puts there. What a being is can be known only through its object. It's like a thought being individuated by what thought is about.
Yeah.
But well, that talks about a mode of knowing, it's not existence.
Yeah. That's right. So
that doesn't actually dismiss the idea of God. I could think about God. But God could have, I could think about an object, but that doesn't make the object for me in the sense that I get the object inside me. Got his dignity independent of me.
Yeah. Yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah. I think it's not. I think the argument doesn't hold water in that respect. No.
Yeah. It seems to build on this argument. Yeah.
Well, I mean, the argument clearly isn't that an herbivorous animal generates sort of in its head the grass that it eats. So it's not an argument directly you're right about existence. But it's the argument presuming that organisms have these essential relations to objects, which tell you about the
It tells
organism.
you about the human mind.
It tells you about the organism. So,
Yeah.
and then the question about putative existence or not of those objects is a separate question.
If we are to understand what a herbivorous animal is, as opposed to a carnivorous animal, we've got to refer to plants and plants and animals, basically. If we are to understand what makes in addition to that human being, what singles out human being, then we've got to talk about what's specific about human being, and that is reason, he seems to be suggesting. And how can we see what reason is if we see its operation, if we see what it does and what it relates to? And
it's a strange argument, isn't it, in a way, because it's putting these are things that are outside. The light is outside.
yeah,
The
God
eye,
is not outside.
and so it seems the opposite of what he's deep down what he's trying to say.
Yeah.
That we're not a sort of God organ.
Yeah, exactly. It's not.
It's the opposite, and then the whole notion of projection is the detectability.
Yeah. Whereas the eye is the light organ, you can't say reason is the God organ.
Yeah.
Yeah. But of course, on the assumption that we know that God doesn't exist, then when we look at what people say about God, we learn what they are themselves. That's
Yeah, that's the way I was making sense.
that's the way it makes sense. And I think that, I mean, certainly historically, that's not a question of the legitimacy of the argument, but historically for a long that was clear. We accepted basically the scientific worldview as far as that's concerned. So only then God is an object for man. He can still say that, even if this object does not exist.
That was explained, so maybe an answer to Phil earlier.
How?
Man is always could think that thought,
Yeah.
or there's some need, psychological need with him to think that thought.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, how do you say that, Phil?
Precisely. If there's a psychological need, that must arise from something within reality. It must arise from, I mean, if there's a psychological need, it doesn't just arise from nowhere.
Yeah, that's right. It doesn't have to arise from God, does it? You know?
No, but then somebody has to give an account of where it arises from.
I think Marx does that.
They just say
That's refined by God, yeah.
But also it's not psychological, it's also very clearly historical. This historical understanding, that account of how it has been that humans have had a need to think of God. And virtually being a historical argument, it allows for that to say, well, this may have been true up to now, but it's no longer the case. Whereas a psychological account would be more universal, I suppose. Depending on how that psychology is understood.
Yeah, he says somewhere here what that need is.
Well, one place where I found it was towards the end of section 10, I've got a different edition for the rest of you. But after the discussion of Leibniz and Wolff, he says, for what is the mind and generally the being of God? There's nothing other than the mind and being of man, separated from determinations, be they real or assumed, that at certain times are bounds on man.
Yeah.
So, separated from the determinations, be they real or assumed, that at certain times are bounds on man. So, typically, insofar as human beings can't envisage themselves as being omniscient, they will then take that to be a property instantiated by God. But when historically they can and to recognise themselves as omniscient, then they no longer need to engage in that form of externalisation.
Yeah, exactly. He Feuerbach calls God das Ja-Wort zu unseren Wünschen. The I do to our wishes. As in Ja-Wort is the yes word as in marriage. So it's God saying yes, I do. So yeah, I think that's nicely put. Yeah. Oh no, I think that's nice. And that's also, so it is precisely, Phil, as you say, the question is precisely where do these things come from? That's the whole point of it, is to give an account of those. But to say simply because there is a thought of a God, therefore there must be a God, that kind of sort of short circuit version of the ontological proof, that seems to be something that, insofar as that characterizes a certain aspect of Hegelianism, that's precisely what Feuerbach is arguing against. Saying that's a kind of, that is, as it were, hypostatized thinking. That is reason, that is literally, as Adorno would say, reason turning into myth. You know, that's because there is, you can think of a formal principle, you then would say that that formal principle is real in an object, in a thing-like sense. Maybe, yeah? Okay, so that then gives us a distinction between theology and philosophy. Ordinary theology turns the standpoint of man into the standpoint of God. By contrast, speculative theology turns the standpoint of God into the standpoint of man, or rather into that of the thinker. And that's a big distinction, because the human being is not a thinker, and the new philosophy, he says that later on explicitly, is based on the idea that the philosopher is not just a thinker, but is a human being. And that is who is thinking, not the thinker. So he sees this sort of prefigures almost the Marxist idea of the division of labor as a kind of abstract notion of human beings, just as the peasant and the hunter in the previous paragraph. And so we get the conclusion at the end of paragraph, in the short paragraph 9, the essential qualities or predicates of the divine being are the essential qualities or predicates of speculative philosophy. Paragraph 10, speculative philosophy is this pure spirit, this pure activity realized as an act of thought, the absolute being as absolute thought. And then I think the main point is that this is itself, just like the idea of God, is kind of hypostasization, is a projection, if that's taken to refer to an absolute spirit that is coming through itself, to itself, through a process of externalizing itself. And that seems to me to be the critique of Hegel's philosophy that's going on here.
In fact, he quotes Hegel in the preceding in paragraph 8, it's the bit where he refers to Hegel's logic.
Yeah.
Read that paragraph. Well, Hegel's logic understands the presentation of God in his eternal world and conceived essence. Well, that's a slightly mangled quotation from Hegel's precise words in the introduction to the logic.
Yeah.
The,
You could do the thoughts of God before the creation of the world. Yeah.
So, I mean, I think there's a lot to be said about the status of that claim in Hegel, which perhaps enables Hegel to jump free from the charge which Feuerbach is putting to him here, but certainly in this case Hegel does say that. So he invites that reading, which certainly Feuerbach runs with.
Yeah. That's right, and then he repeats the argument that there is this intellectualization already implicit in it. How, they exclaimed in horror, can this God be our God? The God of the philosophers, as it were. And yet, what else is this God if not the God of theism, who has been drawn out of the fog of the imagination and brought into the light of the determining thought? The God of theism has created and ordered everything according to measure, number, or weight taken, so to speak, by his word. Yeah.
Well, it's not an implausible criticism of Hegel that, pick up on Phil's point earlier, that Feuerbach isn't ignoring what Hegel has to say about the label of the concept of Feuerbach. It's rather that Feuerbach thinks that Hegel overdoes the label of the concept and makes it too kind of burdensome and transcendent in relation to us, as something which stands to us as God does to the theologian. That's certainly a way of taking Hegel, and I'm not sure it's altogether right, but it's the way Hegel allows himself to be read.
Yeah, I think that, yes, I think there is that aspect of the label of the concept in Hegel where it becomes an imposition. But there's also another aspect of the label of the concept in Hegel, according to which it is, the reality is there. Whether or not we think about it, we do think about it. And when we think about it, we try to cognize as many, as much of it as, or the most important elements of it as we can. But reality goes on, to a certain extent uncognized, however much we try to cognize it. So in that sense, Hegel is trying, with the idea of the concept, is trying to philosophically project that idea of that part of reality that we haven't cognized, which does seem to be important, because otherwise you get a sort of imperious or sort of arrogant philosophical view that we know everything about that, so let's move on to something else, when maybe we don't know everything about that. So that's the way I understand the importance of the concept in Hegel's philosophy, that he's telling us that we've got to be attentive to reality, even when we think we've analysed it to death or something like that.
Yeah.
So it's sort of hubris it's the opposite of sort of arbitrary imposition in that sense. I mean, I think there are elements of arbitrary imposition in Hegel, but the concept, in the sense that I'm just trying to outline, is not an arbitrary imposition, but it's something that we need to be aware of, the gap between the way we think about the world and the way the world actually is.
Yeah.
And Feuerbach seems to be correctly attacking the one element of the concept, but seems to be ignoring the other aspect of the concept, because he seems to be emphasizing the human sensuous practical activity so much that you know, it's as though we're supposed to get all the answers from that. I don't know whether I'm making myself clear.
No, I think I think there's a reason in modern philosophy since they got abstracting from reality, taking the essence of things and dropping the real existence.
Yeah, that is what Feuerbach seems to be saying, and I think this is a difficult question because it leads to the question: what is the history of philosophy? It leads to the question: what does it mean to read, you know, an old Dutch philosopher like Hegel or somebody else? Hegel had quite an explicit idea of philosophy, of the relation between, as we know, between philosophy and its history, and he had quite a not straightforward, but quite a well thought out story of how philosophical positions are necessary in the development that leads ultimately to his own philosophy. You see something quite not with the same kind of grandeur, but you see a similar atmosphere still here in Feuerbach when he speaks about. And Feuerbach started as a historian of philosophy. He tried to get his habilitation as a historian of philosophy, but he failed. Not because he wasn't a good historian of philosophy, but because he was an atheist. But you can see that in much of his writings, in his written histories of philosophy, especially a very interesting history of British thinkers, also Roger Bacon, Duns Scotus, and people like that. But you see here, and I think writing something like this in 1843, you know, this little paragraph here is almost like it reads a bit like a cursory summary of a contemporary module from Descartes to Kant or something like that. It's quite something to write in these few words. But it is very much the idea of philosophy as engaged in a kind of progress, of thinkers coming one coming after the other, also in a medium way, and adding a little bit to it. And it seems to have less space for an experience of the history of philosophy, which is more attuned to all these complexities of different thinkers. So yes, of course, Hegel, I think I agree completely with what Phil says. Hegel is not denying the relevance of experience or the empirical, quite far from it. He's not denying the idea that his concepts or ideas are these schemata that are just pushed onto the world. That's completely inaccurate. It's kind of a caricature. So there's much more going on in Hegel than just that side that's being criticized here. And within Hegel's philosophy, you can put a lot of the things that Feuerbach is concerned with. You can put them also in their place. So this idea that history of philosophy is this one thing, or that even the way philosophers are related to each other can be clearly stated, is I think I would say incorrect. And we still have to learn, even if we think about the history of philosophy, we still have to learn a lot about that. We still have to learn that a real thinker like Hegel or Kant, that they have a kind of inexhaustible quality in themselves, which is not, even if somebody criticizes them for something, or there is a sort of development of which they are part, which in a way there remains something in them that escapes that. It's not the case that that there's no value in reading Kant anymore now that we have had Hegel or something like that. That's simply not the case. And so we can ask ourselves, what is it in philosophy that, pretty much like in music, I would say, that makes it the case that while there is on one hand a history, so we get Mahler after Beethoven, and it couldn't be the other way around, as it were, but that doesn't mean that one cancels out the other. No?
But he's taking them from a single point of view. He's not talking about the whole philosophy. He's talking about maybe subjectivity and God
Yeah.
and nature.
Yeah. He's making very clear. It's almost this thing is almost like a manifesto, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. In that sense, it's self-typically modern, and it's wedded to this idea that the history of modern philosophy is a tradition of revolutions, as some people have said. Yeah. Although he was a political revolutionary himself, but he's advocating a kind of revolution in how we think about philosophy, what we think philosophy is. Well, so we won't read this, but it's very interesting, this paragraph 10 for that relation to the history of philosophy. I think I want to move on now a little bit to I want to leave out the discussion of materialism on pantheism. But we should discuss the basis of materialism. Pantheism is the negation of theoretical, and empiricism the negation of practical theology.
What page are you on? Oh, yes.
Paragraph 16. Pantheism negates the principle, whereas empiricism negates the consequences of theology. So pantheism negates the principles of theology, namely saying that God is everything and is not this other object. And empiricism negates the consequences of theology, namely in saying that the explanation of the world has to happen on its own terms and not by reference to something that cannot be observed. Pantheism makes God into a present, real and material being. Empiricism, to which rationalism also belongs, makes God into an absent, remote, unreal and negative being. That's true. Empiricism does not deny God's existence, but denies him all positive determinations, because their content is supposed to be only finite and empirical. The infinite cannot ever be an object for man. But the more determination I deny to a being, the more do I cut it off for myself, and the less power and influence I concede it over me, the freer I will make myself of it. The more qualities I possess, the more I am for others, and the greater is the extent of my influence and effects. So you see again this relational thinking. And the more one is, the more one is known to others. Hence, each negation of an attribute of God is a partial atheism, a sphere of godlessness. To the extent to which I take away an attribute of God, to the same extent do I take away his being. If, for example, sympathy and mercy are not attributes of God, then I am alone with myself and my suffering. God is not there as my comforter. If God is the negation of all that is finite, then the consequence of finite is the negation of God. Only if God thinks of me, so concludes the religious man, have I reason and cause to think of him. Only in his being for me lies the ground of my being for him. In truth, therefore, the theological being is no longer anything to empiricism, at least nothing real, but empiricism does not transpose this non-being into the object, but only into itself, into its knowledge. Yeah, sorry, I lost it now. Sorry, I missed. Okay. The concern of modern philosophy was therefore none other than to elevate the pathological judgment of empiricism, theology is nothing, to a theoretical and objective judgment, to transform the indirect, unconscious and negative negation of theology into a direct, positive and conscious negation, How ridiculous it is therefore to want to suppress the atheism of philosophy without at the same time suppressing the atheism of empiricism, which is the pantheistic position. How ridiculous is it to persecute the theoretical negation of Christianity and to ignore the actual refutations of Christianity with which the modern era is replete.
Similar point to Nietzsche about the death of God. The idea of God has been discredited. He doesn't argue against God. Here's again, he's saying that empiricism doesn't deny God. So to present argument that builds on the idea that that former idea is discredited.
Yeah. We are always accommodating to whatever has happened in the past and acknowledge the necessity of all change and revolutions that have occurred, but we resist with all means at our disposal to take the same attitude to the present situation. Out of short-sightedness and complacency, we accept the present from the room. Okay. So, okay, let's go to part 2.
Sorry, that sentence, we are always accommodating to whatever has happened in the past and acknowledge the necessity of all the changes and revolutions that have occurred. That sounds like an oddly uncritical view of the past. He seems to have a sort of presentism here that the basis of any change has to come from the present situation. But surely the past is replete with possibilities which weren't actualized because people got things wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, but he says himself, how ridiculous is it to hold that with the awareness of the symptom of evil, the cause of evil is also eliminated? How ridiculous indeed. And yet how rich is history in such mockeries? In a way, that's the whole point of that's one of the points of the idealist philosophy, the Platonic trait of thinking that if you understand it, that what we began with, changing how you think, is making a real change. And that's not true, he says. And he says, why does that always happen? We are always accommodating to whatever has happened in the past and acknowledge the necessity of all the changes and revolutions that have occurred. Yeah.
I think something's gone wrong here for Feuerbach, because he's accepting that things could have gone wrong in the past, and then he's contradicting himself, saying, "But we've got to start from the present."
Yeah.
So he seems to be undervaluing the importance of having good criticisms of the past.
No, isn't he just kind of criticising a complacent attitude towards the past? Like, revolutions are fine there, but not now.
No. Yeah, is that what you're saying?
So the penultimate sentence in the version I'm reading says, "For with regard to the past, all is looked on favourably, and the necessity of the changes and revolutions that occurred is acknowledged. Its application, however, to the present situation is opposed with every means available." That seems to be criticising this point of view as being refusing to allow in the present to see the need for revolutions as have been complacently allowed to have been required in the past. So he's criticising this point of view, not endorsing it.
Isn't he just drawing attention to the importance of what's going on? That we are living in a change. We don't appreciate the change, but we appreciate changes that happen in the past.
Well, isn't he saying, whereas with respect to all the changes that were necessary in the past, critical mind says, yeah, they have to happen, but with respect to the present, it believes that critique is enough. Isn't that what he says?
Yeah.
He says, how ridiculous is it to want to persecute the theoretical negation of Christianity, so people who profess themselves to be atheists, but to ignore the actual refutation of Christianity with which modern era is replete, i.e. the inhuman conditions in which we live, as it were, the unjust world in which we live, or something like that.
Or science.
Yeah. How ridiculous is it to hold that with the awareness of the symptom of evil, the cause of evil is also eliminated. No, that seems to be different again, huh? Yeah.
Yeah.
But he says these mockeries repeat themselves in all critical periods. And no wonder. Because we accept what happened in the past and we say these changes were necessary, but we don't want to do that with respect to the present situation. So it either means that we do not want to engage in what is really necessary today, out of complacency and short-sightedness, in which case it is irony to say how ridiculous it is to hold that how ridiculous it is to persecute the theoretical negation of Christianity and to ignore the actual refutation of Christianity as modern era should lead. You could say, so we're not having the spirit of Christianity, or you could take it more literally to mean it is ridiculous to just have a problem with theoretical atheism and not see that nobody actually is living in, that nobody believes in actually anymore, Christianity. I don't know, maybe it doesn't, yeah.
It's the second view seems most straightforward.
Yeah, yeah. People don't really believe it anyway anymore, and it's still a bit ironical. But then it turns around in how ridiculous it is to hold it with the awareness of the sin, we of course we would also eliminate it. Yeah. Maybe this doesn't entirely make sense. But I think we should move on. And maybe we should even just leave part 2, although it's very important, of course.
Can I just say that in that passage we've just been discussing, it's not clear where Feuerbach is locating the cause of evil.
Yeah.
Is he locating it in the present, or is he locating it in the present and the past? And if he's only locating it in the present, why is it only in the present? Why can't it be in the past as well? Why can't things have gone wrong in the past?
Why can't things?
Why can't things have gone wrong in the past? If it's only the present that has got wrong in it.
Yeah.
It just seems to be abstracting the present from the past, which doesn't seem to make sense to me.
Yeah, but all he seems to be saying is that people accept that the things that happened in the past are necessary, but they don't. The changes and revolutions that happened in the past were necessary.
Completely necessary to overcome
But they don't.
evil things.
Whatever, but they don't want to accept that these are also necessary today. Or is that not it?
Okay, well, I mean, maybe it becomes clearer later on, but
Okay, let's yeah, maybe not that important to that one yet. Maybe it is. Let's go quickly to part 2, because I want to point, we're not going to go through all the paragraphs, that's not doable. But we get here this critique of Hegelian philosophy. And then we've seen the gist now. The Hegelian philosophy is inverted theological idealism, just as the Spinozist philosophy is theological materialism. There's a whole discussion there. Concept, identity, thinking and being, paragraph 24, which is the central point in the philosophy of identity, is nothing other than a necessary consequence and unfolding of the concept of God, as the being whose concept or essence contains existence. Speculative philosophy is only generalized and made into an attribute of thought or of concept in general, while theology made it into an exclusive attribute of the concept of God. And then we get paragraph 26, being and abstraction, and that's where we get back to the critique of the speculative philosophy as abstract. A being that only thinks and thinks abstractly has no idea at all of what being, existence and reality are. Later on he will start to say that will, or love as he calls it, is how we understand existence. A being that only thinks and thinks abstractly has no idea at all of what being, existence and reality are. Thought is bounded by being. Being qua being is not an object of philosophy, at least not of abstract and absolute philosophy. Being, and that's of course a direct assault on Aristotle, as it were, or the whole classical tradition, which is nothing else than, which understands itself as saying philosophy is the science of being qua being. Speculative philosophy itself expresses this indirectly insofar as it equates being with non-being. There is nothing, but nothing cannot be an object of thought. And later on goes on to say that this opposition is the fundamental one in the speculative philosophy between being and not being, and actually being the same. And then it says this identity of opposites always leaves out the middle term, which is always the concretely existing thing. And from the perspective of concretely existing thing, there is no such thing as an identity of oppositions. And then from that you get, we're going quickly now because we want to get to part 3, words and life, paragraph 28. The Hegelian philosophy has remained unable to overcome the contradiction of thought and being. The being with which the phenomenology began stands no less than the being with which the logic begins in the most direct contradiction to real being, despite the start in the Zurich side. This contradiction manifests itself in the phenomenology in the form of the this and the general. For the particular belongs to being, but the general to thought. And that's something he repeats time and again. Now in phenomenology, one kind of this flows into another kind of this in a way indistinguishable for thought. But what an enormous difference there is between a this that is the object of abstract thought and a this that is the object of reality. This wife, for example, is my wife, and this house is my house. Although everyone speaks, as I do, of his house and his wife as this house and this wife. Yeah? There's a big difference. And then paragraph 29, the abstract is contrasted with the concrete. And this is where one of the things that I've singled out several times as somehow the essence of what we understand by materialism in this German tradition comes to the fore. Thought that seeks to reach beyond its other, and the other of thought is being, is thought that oversteps its natural boundaries. Remember the theme of transgression that we began with. This reaching beyond its other on the part of thought means that it claims for itself that which does not properly belong to thought but to being. That which belongs to being is particularity and individuality, whereas that which belongs to thought is generality. Thought thus lays claim to particularity. It makes the negation of generality, that is particularity, which is the essential form of sensuousness, into a moment of thought. In this way, abstract thought, or abstract concept, which has being outside itself, becomes a concrete concept. And that's where it says this is the root of all the difficulties in understanding what Hegel means with the concrete universal, because you can't really make sense of it. But in a way, he is Feuerbach is this is very much him speaking, I think. This is very much the crux of where the difference between Hegel and Feuerbach, the idealism and materialism, lies. Because it's not that Feuerbach says this is not what's going on. No, it is what's going on. But Hegel objectifies, hypostasizes this into the movement of spirit in which thought creates its own other in its movement of relating to itself. Whereas for a materialist viewpoint, thought is still what it is here, but it doesn't create its other. Hegel tries to in a way, that's the conundrum of absolute idealism, speculative metaphysics, tries to think its way into that which cannot be thought. Remember that this is very, very reminiscent of how Adorno writes about non-identity and writes about philosophy as inspired by the desire that it is possible in conceptual terms to address, speak of, or express the non-conceptual. And for Adorno, I think he's in line with this whole tradition of philosophy. That is the point of philosophy, is not to give up that wish. That is what philosophy is about. It is thought realizing that it is about reaching beyond its other. When that moment itself is taken up into a final absolute system of thought, as it were, it kills it off. And yet, in a way, thought must try to do that. Or must be open to that's its desire, that's its will, as it were. And so we can understand with this idea also, we can understand why idealism is, as it were, use these broad categories now, why idealism is, as it were, the permanent temptation of thought. It's the permanent, it's like it constantly tips over into it and has then to be drawn back from it. But that, when you do that, you get what he says, a properly philosophical notion of experience, of thought, of idea, of concept, rather than of human being, rather than a scientific one. And that is in itself its own activity. That's its own thing. We need that kind of engagement with truth with what it means to think, if we are to keep thought away from this, succumbing to this temptation. And in a way, he just reads back the history of philosophy with this idea, and says, look, these are all the places where this desire to reach beyond its other got the better of itself. You know. You see this paragraph 29. Only the lizard man has the birthplace of God. You see this in this paragraph 29, we get the notion of the body. Just as this paragraph here, just as by decorporealizing himself, or by negating the body, the rational limit of subjectivity. So in a way, philosophy is always concerned with the body. Man lapses into a fantastic and transcendent practice, surrounding himself with corporealized appearances of spirits and gods. And in a way, speculative philosophy is also that kind of corporealization of idea. That is practically eliminating the distinction between imagination and sense perception. So also does the difference between thought and being, subjective and objective, sensuous and non-sensuous, theoretically disappear, and matter has no reality for him and is consequently not a boundary limiting the thinking reason, and yet one that reason always reaches out for. That is when reason, the intellectual being, or the essence of the thinking in general, is in its boundlessness, the sole and absolute being for him. Thought negates everything, but only in order to posit everything in itself. It no longer has a boundary in anything that exists outside itself, precisely thereby it steps out of its immanent and natural limits. In this way, reason, the idea, becomes concrete. This means that what should flow from sense perception is made a property of thought, and what is the function and concern of the sense of sensibility out of life becomes the function and concern of thought. What is imagination and fantasy with the Neoplatonists, Hegel has really transformed into the concept, or in other words, rationalized. Hegel is not the German Christian Aristotle, he is the German Proteus. Absolute philosophy is the reborn Alexandrian philosophy. That's nice, that's very nicely put. It also speaks to this encyclopedic characteristic of Alexandrian thought. In a way, it's very nice because if you want to psychoanalyze it, it highlights this ably retentive aspect of absolute speculative philosophy that wants to capture it all, wants to contain it all. According to Hegel's explicit characterization, it's not Aristotelian, nor the ancient pagan philosophy in general, but that of the Alexandrian school that is absolute. Yeah. Hegel is a thinker who surpasses himself in thought. And whereas he should be surpassing thought, thought is the surpassing of itself into its other. But he tries to surpass that in thought. Surpassing the surpassing in thought. His aim is to capture the thing in itself, and only in the thought of the thing. He wants to be outside of thought, but still remaining within thought. and some difficulty in grasping the concrete concept. And I think this is really the crux of the whole matter, because it's not just that it doesn't make sense to want to be outside of thought but still remain within thought. That's not the point. The point is how that is done. And maybe for Feuerbach that doesn't become so explicit here, but that must be, I think, the conclusion. The most important word there is this word want. What is this will? To be outside of thought but still remaining within thought. And that is a very powerful critique of a lot of a big aspect of what philosophy has been, and that's, I think, what we mean by idealism. But of course, philosophy as the attempt to think the outside of thought is that. It is in a way that will. And there's no, and even Feuerbach is doing that here in this essay, isn't he? He's trying to cure thought of its connatural liability to gobble everything up. But
gobbling is seriously, obviously, because Feuerbach gets interested in the physiological and materialistic and the processes of consumption and so forth as being proper ways related to objectivity. But is there something specifically going on here in terms of his characterization and critique of Hegel in terms of the way thought positions itself with regard to its other, in particular as involving this process of, as he said at the very beginning of the preceding paragraph, overreaching, which I guess is translating the German, which I didn't have a chance to check, übergreifen, overgrasping.
Yeah.
The opening sentence in paragraph 29.
29.
Sorry?
Überschreiten.
Yeah.
Überschreiten. No, I was hoping it was übergreifen. So
Is it überschreiten?
Right. Just because Hegel claims that the concept can übergreif, reach beyond it, grasp its other, overgrasp its other. And that's in virtue of being the concept, which can grasp beyond itself. I assume that's what's going on there, partly because of what he says at the end of paragraph 30 as well, we get the grasping the concrete concept.
Yeah, it says übergreifen. Well, it says here, it says both. Es says, das Übersein anderes, das andere des Denkens ist aber das sein übergreifende Denken. Ist das seine Naturgrenze überschreitende Denken. Das Denken greift über sein Gegenteil über, reaches over its opposite, its Gegenteil, its counterpart. Das Denken vindiziert sich, vindicates itself, was nicht dem Denken, sondern dem Sein zukommt. What doesn't belong to thought, but to being. And so, it makes the negation of generality, which is the essential form of sensuousness, to particularity, makes it into a moment of thinking. And so the abstract thought or the abstract concept, which has its being without itself, becomes a concrete concept. Sorry, what
Yeah, well, it was just simply that if the particular problem with conceptual thought is its endeavour to overgrasp its other, go beyond the conceptual through the conceptual, then that would leave open, presumably, the possibility of there being other ways thought could be open to the other.
Yeah.
Which didn't involve taking the other was to be itself grasped in this process
exactly.
of the concept grasping its other, which has a rather sort of sense of
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, this is
Molding grass.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. No, that's my point. Yeah, so it has to do with what he calls materialism, or the problem that he's really struggling with here is, what does it mean to say that thought thinks it's other? And the not that it does it, because that is what thought is. That is what it is. But how it does it? It's a question of attitude. I think I've said that before. So the difference between idealism and materialism is not, for Feuerbach, and that's where now it becomes philosophically interesting and meaty, is not a difference in position, like the basic stuff of the world is mind, or the basic stuff of reality is matter, or something like that, you know. What is mind? Or what is, you know. But that's not the point here. The point is, what is the attitude with which we relate to thought thinks it's other? That is the point. And that's where the difference comes in. And you see it immediately in paragraph 31. The recognition of the light of reality within the darkness of abstraction is a contradiction. Both the affirmation and the negation of the real at one and the same time. You can only affirm the real if you negate it, in a way. That's the operation of thought. The new philosophy, which thinks the concrete, not in an abstract but a concrete way, and that's the same as a repetition of the same contradiction. What does it mean to think concrete in a concrete way? Which acknowledges the real in its reality, that is, in a way corresponding to the being of the real as true, which elevates it into the principle and object of philosophy, is consequentially the truth of the Hegelian philosophy, indeed of modern philosophy as a whole. It is the truth of the Hegelian philosophy because it says what Hegel tries to do, but which in his own self-understanding he misconstrues.
It does not seem to beg the question, though, of what one is supposed to do with the relationship between the finite and the infinite in Hegel. Because it seems as though Feuerbach wants to say, let's forget about the infinite and let's just deal with the finite. But if you do that, you've got no relationship between the finite and the infinite. And that seems like a massive problem.
Yeah, but because he goes on to say that this real sensuousness is actually infinite.
Where does he say that?
Look it up. Yeah, paragraph 33. The new only in feeling and love has the demonstrative this person, this thing, that is a particular, absolute value. Only then is the finite infinite. In this and this alone does the infinite depth, divinity, and truth of love consist. In love alone resides the truth and reality of the God, who counts the hairs on your head. The Christian God himself is only an abstraction from human love and an image of it. And since the demonstrative this owes its absolute value to love alone, it is only in love, not in abstract thoughts, that the secret of being is revealed. Love is passion, and passion alone is the distinctive mark of existence. This is now going very, very quickly. There's a step here in between where we just were and where we are now here, and that is the introduction of this notion of sensuousness. The truth, he says, that just as the new philosophy is the truth of Hegel's philosophy, so we can say that the reality of the idea is sensuousness. What is this non-thought? There's something different from thought, which is basically being. It's the real. What is it? It is, and he says, it is the sensuous. That thought realizes itself means accordingly that it makes itself the object of the senses. Thus, the reality of the idea is sensuousness, but reality is also the truth of the idea. Hence, sensuousness is the truth of the idea. But in this way, we have at the same time made sensuousness the predicate and the idea of thought the subject. The only question is, why does the idea take on sensuousness? Why does it cease to be true, but it is not real or sensuous? Is not its truth thus made dependent on sensuousness? Are not significance and value thus being conceded to the sensuous as such? That is, apart from its being the reality of the idea. The demand that the idea realize itself, that in the sheep of sensuousness arises from the fact that sensuous reality is unconsciously held to be the truth, which is both prior to and independent of thought. Thought proves its truth by taking recourse to sensuousness, and that's his main argument. In the end, you always point to something, just as he, as in his discussion of Hegel, said, with Hegel and against Hegel, that only immediacy in the end can provide an argument for accepting something. And he uses that in the distinction that he makes between mere talent and a genius. Genius is the one for whom truth is immediate, a talented person is the one who has to work through mediations, etc., etc. So he says there is unconsciously an affirmation that only in sensuousness can the truth of an idea be found.
I have to zoom off, I'm afraid. Sorry, it's
that's fine for 6. Yeah, no, that's fine. That's okay.
I'll see you next week.
Thanks.
Next week, 2 weeks time.
2 weeks time, yeah, no,
Sorry,
yeah. Yeah. So, the real is the object of the senses. And that's again a bit of an maybe not entirely correct formulation. And then it goes on to say it's the sensuous. Truth, reality, and sensuousness are one and the same thing. Only the sensuous being is a true and real being. Only through the senses is an object given in the true sense, not through thought for itself. But then he goes on, of course, the whole point of this is to show that what we mean by the senses, the sensuousness, is not just sense data or something like that. It is a relation to an object. It is a relation to a reality. And also the relation that we have to ourselves, and predominantly the relation that I has to you. I am you only insofar as I am a sensuous being. And there you get also another theological idea back, that of the secret. The new philosophy looks upon being. Being is given to us not only as thinking, but also as really existing being. as the object of being is its own object. Being as the object of being, and this alone, is truly, and serves the name of being, essentials being. That is the being involving sense perception, feeling, and love. Or in other words, being is the secret underlying sense perception, feeling, and love. It's something that is infinite or inexhaustible. And then he goes on to say that so only passion defines existence. Abstract thought, which is devoid of feeling and passion, abolishes the distinction between being and non-being, because for non-existent for thought, this distinction is a reality for love. For love, it makes a difference whether something is or is not, but it doesn't for abstract thought. To love is nothing else than to become aware of this distinction between being and non-being. It is a complete indifference to someone who loves nothing, whether something exists or not, and be that what it may. But just as being, as distinguished from non-being, is given to me through love and feeling in general, so is everything else that is other than me given to me through love. If I don't have any connection to it, then it doesn't mean anything to me. Pain is a loud protest against identifying the subjective with the objective. The pain of love means that what is in the mind is not given in reality, or in other words, subjective is here the objective, the concept itself the object. But this is precisely what not to be, what is a contradiction, untruth, and misfortune. Hence the desire for that true state of affairs in which the subjective and the objective are not identical. Human feelings, and then we get again this motif of rescuing religion. Human feelings have therefore no empirical or anthropological significance in the sense of the old transcendental philosophy. They have rather an ontological and metaphysical significance. Feelings, everyday feelings, contain the deepest and highest truths. Thus, for example, love is the true ontological demonstration of the existence of objects apart from our head. There is no other proof of being except love or feeling in general. Only that whose being brings you joy and whose not being in pain has existence. The difference between subject and object, being and non-being, is as happy a difference as it is painful. Yeah. And so, it's easy to misunderstand it and to read it in kind of solipsism or whatever, but he's talking, I think, about thought as the moment of reaching out to something else, or this transgressive movement. That is what he's talking about. And he locates that in sensuousness, not strange because sense experience is relational. And that is what he calls matter. That is what he calls materialism. This leads to a whole, we have to stop now. But this, then, we can talk about this next time when we talk about Marx as well. A little bit more about this, about what this sort of leads to, because this now becomes a whole philosophy which in the end is the mode of man thinking about him or herself. Not as a thinker, an abstract thinker, but as a human being. Yeah, there's much more here. We'll talk a bit more about this next time, because we have to stop now. So we'll finish this next time and then also do Marx. Yeah?